In this beautiful game from Tigran Petrosian, his opponent seems to only make one slight mistake, and then his entire position falls apart like a house of cards in what appears to be an effortless victory. And for someone of Petrosian's ability, it probably was. And you look at a game like this and think to yourself, why can't we play like that? Well, we can't, but we can appreciate the beauty of this game. Petrosian had black. His opponent was not a titled player, but good enough to play in an elite tournament. His name was Hans Plotz. This was played in 1952 in Budapest at the Maraxi Memorial. Let us jump right in. White begins with d4. Petrosian plays knight to f6, c4, and g6. It looks like he's going to play the King's Indian defense, which, of course, Petrosian was known for destroying with the white pieces so often. Knight to c3, bishop to g7, e4, d6, and f3. White plays the Zamish variation of the King's Indian, and this construction here with f3 and e4 makes this e4 pawn rock solid. It gives White a very solid center. However, there is a downside to it, and that is these two minor pieces have a tendency to get in each other's way. If the bishop develops to d3 before the knight, then it interferes with the queen's defense of the sensitive d4 pawn. If the knight develops first, it blocks in the bishop at f1. White will, if black blocks in his own bishop at c8, White will often play knight h3, f2 just to get those pieces unraveled. So you get a strong center, but development is a little tougher for White. E5 from black. Usually black would castle first, but it doesn't really matter. Knight g to e2, defending the sensitive d4 square, but again blocking in the bishop at f1. Knight b to d7 from Petrosian. Bishop to e3. You want to overprotect this sensitive d4 square. Castles, and queen to d2. And one of White's strategies in these Zamish King's Indians is similar to the Dragon Sicilian and the Yugoslav attack, where you try to exchange off the dark squared bishop, play h4, h5, and attack on the king's side. c6 from black. He wants to make sure, Petrosian wants to make sure that he keeps White active in the center, so White doesn't have time to get his normal attacking play. c6 keeps a knight out of d5 and opens up the development for the black queen. Now here, White makes a move, very interesting, b3. More common and probably better are d5 or also a long castling. But b3 is an interesting move. It defends c4, which is usually a sensitive spot in White's position, precisely because this bishop at f1 is blocked and cannot defend it. But this is a little slow. This is a pawn move instead of a piece move, and it appears this slight inaccuracy is all Petrosian needs to really create an avalanche of threats in this position. There's a possible move here from black that he did not play, actually d5, just kind of opening things up in the center as quickly as possible, trying to take advantage of White's king in the middle of the board. Petrosian plays a little more orthodox a6. He wants to play b5 and put pressure on this c4 pawn, which again is a little bit vulnerable because the bishop is not directly defending it. g3, White decides to develop the bishop with a fianchetto at g2. b5, again attacking c4. Bishop to g2, bc4, bc4, and ed4. And all of a sudden, Petrosian already has a very nice position. There are all kinds of dark squared weaknesses in White's position. He has weak pawns, and his whole pawn structure is a little unwieldy. And look at the safety of the king. g8, very comfortable, very safe. But where's White's king going to find a safe spot? Really clear opening play from Tigran Petrosian here. Knight to e5. Now the threats begin. He directly attacks the c4 pawn that he's already made weak. Knight attacks it. Queen to e2 defends the pawn. Queen to a5. Pins, because the queen defended the pawn, now this knight is undefended. Petrosian pins it and is threatening to capture it. So rook to c1 to defend the knight. And here a very strong move. c5. Kicking the knight from d4. Now he is creating weaknesses on d5 and d6. A weak square on d5, a weak pawn on d6. But he is understands that it's really hard for White to do anything with those. And his pressure is much faster here. After the knight moves, it attacks the queen, but the queen just goes to b4, adding another attacker to the c pawn and keeping the pin on this knight at c3. Here, White just goes ahead and castles. And Petrosian could capture on c4. He could take with the queen. After the exchange of queens, bishop g5. Black's a little better, but white's still very much in the game. He could also take with the knight here. After bishop g5, again, black is better, but white is still in the game. But instead of just capturing the pawn, Petrosian decides to build pressure on the pawn with bishop to e6, which is really the main reason he played c5. So the knight at d4 couldn't capture that bishop. So now there are 3 pieces attacking the c4 weaknesses. Notice he has a single weakness, and he directs all of his pieces towards that one weakness. Knight to d5, jumping in. He goes ahead and takes with the knight, clearing the way for his dark squared bishop, unblocking his own bishop. He doesn't want to give up the bishop pair by taking with the light squared bishop. And after cd5, there's a protected pass pawn right on the c file for Petrosian. Bishop to d7, the threats keep on coming. He's threatening bishop to b5, skewering the queen and the rook, which would win material. So white plays rook f to d1 to get away from that. The bishop goes to b5 anyway, because it's a nice active diagonal. And just look at Petrosian's bishops. The dark squared bishop, the light squared bishop, both on beautiful squares, sweeping the entire board. White goes ahead and exchanges queens. Petrosian could play a5 here, but he sees that after queen takes queen, white is going to have some real problems. Here, he takes with the rook, but if he takes with the knight, Petrosian will play bishop to e2, hitting that rook. And if the rook moves, so he doesn't want to lose the exchange, but then knight to d3 would come in and fork the 2 rooks, and that would win material. He could also take with the bishop, but after knight d3, hitting the rook, and c4, hitting the knight, the bishop's coming in to d4 with check. It's a terrible position, and white is just losing there. So he takes with the rook, but that leads to the win of an exchange. Can you see the tactic here? That's right, knight to c4 threatens the rook and the bishop. If the rook moves and protects the bishop, the knight takes bishop, rook takes knight, and then c4. Kicks this knight away, and when the knight moves, bishop to d4 will pin that rook and win the exchange. Knight to d2, bishop to d4. So because of that, because white doesn't want to lose the dark squared bishop, if he's going to lose an exchange anyway, he goes ahead and takes the knight with the other rook. That way he can keep that nice minor piece. Bishop takes c4, knight to a5 hits the bishop just goes back. Knight to b5, Hans Plotz is aiming at this d6 pawn, which is vulnerable, not easy to defend. The knight controls the d8 square where the rook might go to defend the pawn. And if bishop to e5 to defend the pawn, then white just plays f4 and kicks that bishop away. But Petrosian isn't all that worried about that bishop, as it turns out. He just goes ahead and advances this great strength, this c-pawn. And look at this c-pawn's trajectory towards the queening square and how effective these bishops are at escorting it up the board. Really, really beautiful chess. Knight takes d6 from white. c3 hits the rook. Rook goes to c2. Bishop to a4. These 2 bishops work together beautifully to escort this pawn forward. Rook to c1, c2. Now he's threatening bishop to b2, forcing that rook away. f4 from white. If he plays, say, knight to c4 to control this square, so the bishop can't go there, then just rook a to b8 with the threat of rook b8 to b1 would win the game. So he just plays f4. Now bishop to b2. It's that rook. Rook to e1. So the bishop and rook at the moment do prevent the pawn from queening. But Petrosian plays bishop to c3, attacking that rook again. The rook moves back. And now rook a to b8, threatening to go to b1. And in this position, white resigned. Let's say he plays e5, then rook to b1. And you can see there's just not much he can do with the threat of the bishop coming in. That would force a break here on the c1 square. If he plays king to f2, then just bishop to b2, and that's it. There's nothing he can do to prevent the loss of material in that position. A really beautiful game, and it's really, after b3, you have to ask yourself the question, where did white go wrong? It was just a cascading of threats that never seemed to stop. But that's what separates the legends from the rest of us, I suppose. Hope you enjoyed the game. See you again soon at Chess Talk. Goodbye.